So the other big concern that kind of comes up is cost. The cloud is expensive, and it usually comes in the form of a sticker shock where you either look at what you have now, and you try to do a cost estimate, or someone comes back to you, 6 months later, go like, oh my God, we got this huge bill, what happened? So there's a couple of things here. I think one is the cost that folks are typically comparing themselves to is they'll look at the cost of obtaining a server in the cloud, and they'll compare it to the cost of obtaining a piece of hardware. The part that isn't usually considered is what it takes to take that piece of hardware and actually make it accessible, put it in a data center, cool it, run cables to it, etc. So conceptually speaking, what you get is visibility to the truer cost of delivering the service. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does cause that sticker shock reaction. So what can we do about it, and what have we done about it? So one thing is, because cloud measures consumption, you have a greater ability to enable transparency. And we've done this in two ways. One is show back, and the other one is charge back. So all of the department leads that own a set of applications today get a monthly report that says, this is your application, this is exactly how much it costs, and you can actually break it down and see, well, is it the storage, is it the compute, is it the network? So you get much greater visibility into where the costs are coming from, which enables you to make better decisions. You may see that, oh, I have 5 parallel landscapes that I stood up while I was enabling this development. I actually only need 2 at this point. So the chargeback model is sort of the next step up, where you make someone directly responsible for the costs. And every organization have a different way to allocate that, but at the end of the day, if you're paying for it, you will care more. So what happens is the type of discussion it drives versus us coming to the business and the consumer and saying, hey, look, how can we work with you to reduce the cost? They're coming to us saying, hey, help us. We want to save money because this looks expensive. So great, right? We have transparency, so everyone knows it's expensive, but that doesn't necessarily help you understand why it's expensive. What more can you do about it? Well, with cloud, there's a very important concept. So you pay for what you use, but you also pay for what you don't use. And that's a very, very critical component that a lot of folks miss. So let me walk you through 2 practical examples. One is in software as a service space, and conceptually the model is you pay per user per month. So typically what will happen is you will say, I have X users, and you will purchase licenses for all of them. What happens though is you can be paying for folks that aren't necessarily using the system. So you have the ability, using some of that logging before, to see, hey, out of the users that I have, are they logging in? Well, if they're not, then maybe we shouldn't be paying for the license. Well, then you can ask the next question. Do I want them just to log in so they retain the license, or do I want them to log in, maybe create an account, view a couple of reports? So it starts to drive a discussion around what do you want your actual user to look like? And it can actually lead you into helping improve adoption of the system. But at the same time, you are ensuring that folks that are actually using the system, so folks that you're paying for are actually using the system. Now, let me kind of touch on another example in the infrastructure as a service space. So that's where you're traditionally procuring servers. And there's kind of 2 things there. One is a concept we call right-sizing. So what typically happens today, traditionally, because of the way things have evolved, you have typically a long lead cycle time to obtain a piece of hardware, and then it's very difficult to change it after the fact, right? If you decide you need 5 of them versus 3 of them, there's a cycle time that's associated with that. So the behavior that's driven over time is folks ask for their peak capacity multiplied by whatever changes may occur, and then you provision that. So the discussions that we started driving with folks is, look, you can dynamically change your environment. Start with the smallest thing that you think will run. If you think you need 32 CPUs and 64 gigabytes of memory, log in, check. Is it actually using it? If not, make it smaller. If you need to make it bigger, make it bigger. The core concept being is that if you look at the utilization across your infrastructure today, chances are it's roughly 10 to 20%, which is astounding. You have 80% of capital you've invested that's sitting there. So the other aspect of infrastructure as a service and the right sizing is if you look at a typical week, there's 7 days, 24 hours, you're paying by the hour, by the minute, in some cases with cloud providers. How often are you actually using the system? Just 40 days in a work week, give or take. Do you really need to have it running on nights, weekends? What about your dev test landscapes? What about your parallel landscapes? So you have the ability to recoup those costs as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be, seasonable auto-scaling applications. It could simply be a matter of shutting down development when you're not using it. So the end message here is, from a cost standpoint, because you're shifting from your traditional capital to expense model, you have much greater ability to be flexible and immediately recoup those investment costs because they're not locked up, so that you can use them elsewhere. So let's talk a little bit about our journey. So how did we start? We had to start somewhere. So I think, as Neil alluded to previously, we started with solving two problems. One was we needed to deploy an application that was externally available in a secure manner. The other one was we had an application that had availability challenges. So if you notice, neither of these are dev test exploratory use cases. They're actual mission critical workloads. There's things that are important to us. So why did we start this way? Why didn't we kind of just dabble here and there? Well, a couple of reasons. One is, by focusing on solving a specific business problem, you're solving a problem. You're not necessarily experimenting. The other thing is, it gives you first-hand experience of running an actual real application. You're not just setting something up. You get to understand what it takes to operate it, what it takes to support it, to monitor it. The other part is, if you tackle the hard problems first, it makes it easier to do the rest of the migration. You're not answering questions, or you may still be answering questions 6 months or 8 months down the road of, hey, the cloud is not secure, I can't move it, because you've already solved that problem in the beginning. You have a use case. So just to kind of regroup and touch a little bit on the two original applications I mentioned. So the one with the security requirement has been running for over 2 years now. It's passed our internal controls, and it's also a SOX and scope application for us, so it's passed external controls as well. The availability application actually gained some new functionality from the perspective of, it had zero downtime for the past 2.5 years, including upgrades, which is not something that we could have done previously. And we did that all at a fraction of what it used to cost us on-premise, because we right-sized the servers. So what happened then? So after we kind of had our initial foray, we decided to take a more structured approach as to how we migrated services to the cloud, and try to understand, when do we choose each type of service, and why would you choose each one when? So from a high-level perspective, the idea is you want to get the most value for your dollar as you can. So translated into strategy, what that means for us is we want to use SaaS where it makes sense and it meets the business functionality, and then we kind of work our way down from there, as Neil mentioned. So what typically happens is, if you have an application that enables a specific business process, it'll either be offered as a SaaS, let's say in the case of Salesforce, or in some cases there isn't necessarily a SaaS equivalent, or it's not fully functional, in which case you actually do wind up going more into the infrastructure as a service space, sort of bypassing the middle tier. But the middle tier is there because a lot of your custom applications will live there. So in our case, we had a number of externally facing applications that are custom, and 99.999% of them successfully migrated into the PaaS space. There are a couple of exceptions, and that's when you always still have the infrastructure as a service fallback, and a lot of your traditional applications will still continue to reside there, and that's okay. So what about things that don't easily move? What did we do with those? So there's a couple of those, and the important thing is, if you're going through an overall migration, you want to identify them. And some of those are things that you've meant to address, you simply haven't. So as we went through our migration, a number of applications were simply decommissioned. We went through a large ERP implementation recently, so we had a number of systems kind of left around. So we had the opportunity to decommission them and archive the data. So this gave us a great opportunity to do that. A number of applications we were able to redesign and or replatform, but that's a much larger undertaking, and you may only be able to do it for one or two. It's not going to be doable for every single application. So the other aspect there is if you have applications that you still need, that may run on some very proprietary hardware, what do? So two things, really. You can move it into a managed service provider model if one offers it to you. It is much more expensive, and in a lot of ways it's your precursor to the cloud, right? Except in a more dedicated, high-touch type of way. Also comes with the cost. And then the other part is you are going to have some things that won't easily move, or you're not going to be able to move. So I'll give you an example. In Juniper, one of the competitive differentiators for us is we design our own processors that allows us to handle packets. So in this case, we're building a hardware component, and we have a lab where we test it. So because there's a need from a testing perspective to have physical connectivity to the device to ensure it's working, that's not something that you're going to be able to move. I'm sure there's other areas, you may have a microscope that's attached to an old piece of equipment or something like that. There are going to be use cases that will still require for you to have a facility to have that. So let's talk a little bit about the transition itself. So from a technology perspective, as you're making the migration, you're going to have a set of tools that you have on-premise today that you use to manage the infrastructure. There's going to be a set of tools that are in the cloud that the cloud providers give you, and there's a set of other partners and providers that give you other things that you can do. So how do you kind of choose, which tools to use where, and how do you mesh that with what you have today? So there's a couple of things there. You always are going to go through kind of an evaluation selection process, but one of the things that helped us was we focused on keeping things simple. And what I mean by that is, if you think back to what I said about cost management, don't pay for what you don't use. So we took a hard look as to what we had internally for the complicated systems and said, okay, out of what we have here, which part do we actually use? So what that allowed us to do in some cases is we were able to embrace the cloud provider service offering because at the end of the day, it met the needs that we had without necessarily providing the more advanced functionality because we weren't leveraging it. In other cases, because this is not something that you're going to be able to do easily to go through a whole evaluation instead if you want to shift tools, we deferred it. And you know what? That's okay too. The other part is, as you make the migration, there's going to be a lot of change. So what we focused on was making the change incremental. So you make improvements where you can, where you have the resources, and it's okay to move as is, and then make incremental improvements so that you can kind of get your services from there. So the other part of the transition was the people. So one thing that folks think is, you move stuff to the cloud and then you don't need anyone to run it. So that's not true. Clouds don't run themselves. You still need someone to help you run the cloud. So what happened to our folks? What happened to us? So one of the things that's happened is because of things like automation, because of the capabilities that are there, the focus of what people are doing shifted more from being execution-driven to being expertise-driven. So I'll provide an example. So we have a storage team, and their traditional modus operandi was you come to them, you say, hey, I need 50 gigabytes of disk. They go provision it, tell you your disk is here. So as we moved to the cloud, what they did is they took that same process, they automated storage provisioning, and then it gave them time to focus on other things like implementing storage tiering, focusing on data locality, looking at performance, right? There's never a shortage of higher value add activities that you can do. And the important thing is, as we look at other groups that we had in the networking space, in the backup team, the infrastructure delivery team, the operations folks, when you make the transition, those are the people that have the expertise of how your business works today. what sort of things are you doing that can be improved? They know where those opportunities are, the tribal knowledge, right? Practically speaking, they are the ones best positioned to help make the transition. The thing that we did have to focus on is we had to educate them on what are some of these cloud tools that you can leverage, and we had to supplement it with automation aspects and making sure that tool set was available and folks were comfortable using it. But both of those things, if you look at them, cloud is at its core, it's just another technology, right? You have one storage on-premise, it's a different storage solution. If you're looking at automation, it's just another tool. It's not a drastic change. Trying to find someone that's familiar with your business processes, with how things work, that's a much, much harder thing to solve. So that kind of brings us to the end. So one of the things that you'll run into is, as you are moving from on-premise to the cloud, is you're going to have to reconcile some business processes. There's going to be different sets of tools. So it's going to be very easy for you to kind of fall back into the way you've always done things. So the message is, don't give up trying to understand how you can make the new solution work prematurely. Collaborate with other folks that have either done the same or have the expertise, because at the end of the day, we weren't the first ones that moved to the cloud. We're not the last ones. There's many other companies. So we used it as an opportunity to reach out. So if we had a question around, hey, how do we do monitoring? How do you guys handle operations for an auto-scaling application? We reached out to our partners. We reached out to other companies. We went to meetups. We talked to folks, because those are the same challenges that others are going to be going through or have gone through. The other one, this may kind of seem somewhat simplistic, is as you move things, make sure you unplug them, because you will have scenarios where folks will either continue to use the other system in some cases, or the systems will repurpose themselves, which can lead to surprises later down the road. So, and then just to reiterate the last two messages, because they are important. If you make a migration, it's not a revolution. You're not throwing away everything that you have. You're migrating where it makes sense by solving problems and incrementally building on top of that. So not everything you're not gonna have everything that's auto-scaling. No one does, right? So it's important to acknowledge that you're gonna have different sets of applications, and you're gonna incrementally improve each of them. And then the final message is, people are such a critical element of the whole operation, and you already have the folks. You just need to enable them with the education of what tools are available and how to make the transition. So that's all I had. I just want to say thank you for listening to us here, and we can move to Q&A. Clear up on here.
All right, so step right up to the microphone. I have one right here, or you can come ask us questions. Anybody have anything on their mind after hearing about our journey and some of the things we went through to get to the cloud? Should I start asking questions myself? No?
How about how many people have already started the journey?
That's a great one. How many of you have already started moving things to the cloud, either Amazon or Azure or another service? Does this resonate with you? Have you guys been through some of this experience before with your partners and business owners? I'll take that nodding as an absolute yes. Perfect.
We're standing between them and lunch, let's face it.
All right, listen, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. Why don't you guys get some more coffee and food out there, and
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of the conference.